He left her quietly. No fight, no goodbye. Just a silence that stayed longer than his love. The door didn't slam. The sky didn't cry. But her heart broke. In the calmest way possible. She stood there, watching the empty space he left behind. A cup half full. A chair still turned toward his smile. He didn't know that silence could echo louder than sound. And hers did. Every second, every breath. She didn't chase him. She didn't speak. Because love doesn't beg. When it knows it gave everything. People thought she was strong. But inside, her quiet was full of screams. She'd pour 2 cups of tea every morning, then stare at the untouched one, as if it could still hold his warmth. Every night, she sat by the window, where they once dreamed together, and though her eyes stayed dry, her soul kept raining. The world asked, "Are you okay?" She smiled, a perfect mask for a wounded heart. No one noticed that her silence had stories she'd never dare to tell. He walked away thinking he ended something simple. But love never ends. It just changes its voice. And hers became silence. Silence that healed. Silence that hurt. Silence that said, "I loved you more than you'll ever understand." Her quiet wasn't weakness. It was grace. It was her final word. A wordless poem. Written with strength. Not tears. When he remembers her, he won't recall what she said. He'll remember how she said nothing. And how that nothing still follows him everywhere. Because sometimes, silence is the loudest goodbye. Days turned into weeks. And her silence became a routine. A language the world didn't understand. But her heart spoke fluently. She didn't delete his photos. She didn't burn his letters. She just stopped opening them. Not out of hate, but because even memories get tired of being remembered. Every corner of her house still whispered his name. The books they read, the songs they shared, the scent of him that refused to fade. But she learned something beautiful. Not every goodbye needs a word. Sometimes, leaving quietly is how dignity survives love. She started walking alone. To the cafe they once visited. To the park where he first held her hand. Everywhere she went, his absence sat beside her. Silent, patient, like a ghost that couldn't move on. Yet, she didn't run from it. She faced it. She breathed through it. She made peace with the pain. Because she realized, grief isn't an enemy. It's just love with nowhere to go. Her silence grew softer. No longer sharp or broken. It became calm. Like the sea after a storm. People said, she must have forgotten him. But no. She just stopped fighting her memories. She let them stay, but not control her. At night, she'd write in her journal. He left me words I never heard. And I answered with silence he'll never forget. She forgave him quietly. Not because he deserved it, but because her heart needed freedom. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant releasing the weight of what could never return. And in that release, she found herself again. Stronger, softer, wiser. One evening, she stood before the mirror, looked at her reflection, and whispered, "You survived." No tears, no shaking voice. Just truth. Her silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of meaning. Full of peace. He, on the other hand, heard her silence everywhere. In the rain. In the quiet between his laughter. In the pause before sleep. Because guilt speaks too. And it always speaks in echoes. He wondered why her silence still haunted him. Why her absence felt louder than her presence ever did. And that's when he understood. When she stopped speaking, she finally said everything. Months passed, yet her silence still carried his shadow. not as pain anymore, but as a quiet reminder of everything she once gave freely. She didn't hate him. Hate would mean he still mattered. Instead, she simply stopped waiting. And that was her victory. Every sunrise felt different now. She no longer woke up wishing to hear his voice. She woke up thankful that her heart still beat, even after breaking. There was a time when her world revolved around him, but now she'd built her own gravity. She learned that love isn't meant to make you smaller. It's meant to help you grow, even if growth means growing apart. She found beauty in silence. The same silence that once felt heavy now became her comfort. She'd sit in the quiet and listen to her own thoughts. Thoughts that once trembled, now strong, calm, forgiving. Sometimes she would whisper to herself, "He left, but I stayed. And that makes me braver than I ever knew." People began to notice the light returning to her eyes. It wasn't the same sparkle he once adored. It was softer, wiser, born from pain, not innocence. She started smiling again, not because she forgot, but because she finally understood. Love doesn't always end in togetherness. Sometimes it ends in understanding. He, somewhere far away, was surrounded by noise, friends, laughter, music. Yet inside him, there was silence too. Her silence. It followed him everywhere, like a song stuck in his soul. He thought she would break, that she would come running back. But she didn't. And her stillness began to speak, in ways his heart couldn't ignore. One night, he tried to write her name, but his hands trembled. Because you can't write what your heart regrets losing. She, meanwhile, had stopped writing about him. Her notebook now held poems about peace, moonlight, and freedom. She wrote not to remember, but to rebuild. Her silence became a bridge from what was to what could be. It was the kind of silence that heals, that teaches, that whispers, "You are enough, even alone." And for the first time, she believed it. When she looked at the night sky, she didn't see emptiness anymore. She saw space, beautiful, endless, open. And in that space, she placed her pain and let it drift away. He left her, yes, but she left her old self too. The one who begged, the one who waited, the one who thought silence was weakness. Now, her silence was power. It was grace. It was her way of saying, "I survived without making a sound." And that silence spoke louder than any words ever could. Seasons changed. The cold winds came and went. But she stayed steady, quiet as dawn, calm as the sea after pain. Her silence had now turned into wisdom. Where once it was sorrow, now it was serenity. She no longer looked for his return, because she had returned to herself. The world around her noticed it. The gentle glow on her face, the peaceful way she carried her loneliness, the quiet strength in her smile. She had become a woman who didn't need words to prove her worth. Her silence had meaning now. It was her way of saying, "I have faced storms and survived, and I owe no explanation for my peace." He, somewhere far away, saw her again, not in person, but through a photograph shared by a friend. There she was, smiling, radiant, untouchable. And for the first time, he realized what he had lost. It wasn't just love. It was the rare kind of woman who could love deeply and still walk away with grace. Her silence haunted him more than her words ever could. He tried to forget her. But how do you erase a silence that lives in your memory like music? He found himself replaying their quiet moments, the way she listened when he spoke, the way her eyes said things no lips ever could. And he wondered, Had she ever really needed him? Or had she only chosen him out of love, not dependency? Now he knew the truth. She never needed saving. He did. She once thought love was about holding on. But now she knew. Real love sometimes means letting go. Without bitterness. Without noise. Her silence became her story. And her story became strength for others who had loved and lost. When people asked her, "Do you still think of him?" she'd smile and say, "Not every day. But sometimes, yes. Like how you remember an old song. It doesn't hurt anymore. It just reminds you that you once danced." Her words were few, but her silence filled the spaces between them with truth and beauty. At night, she'd stand by her window, watching the moonlight fall over the earth, and whisper to the sky, "Thank you for letting me break. Because in breaking, I became whole." Her silence had transformed from emptiness into peace, from weakness into strength. It was no longer the quiet of loss. It was the calm of understanding. He once left thinking he could live freely without her. Now he lived with the weight of every word she never said. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he could still hear her silence, the softest sound, and the loudest truth. He wanted to reach out, to say sorry, to explain. But how do you speak to someone who already said everything, without a single word? And so, their story remained unfinished. Not with anger, not with tears, but with silence. The kind that heals, and teaches, and echoes forever. Years later, no one would have guessed that the woman who smiled so gracefully had once carried the weight of silence so heavy it could drown the world. Time had softened her pain, turned her heartbreak into art, and her silence into poetry the universe could hear. She no longer waited for apologies. She no longer searched for closure. Because some stories don't end with answers. They end with peace. Her peace was her closure. Her silence was her triumph. She built a life of her own. A life full of quiet mornings. Music she chose for herself. Books that didn't remind her of him. And yet, every now and then, when the night grew still, she remembered the boy who once left. Not with bitterness, but with a strange kind of gratitude. Because if he hadn't left, she would have never learned how powerful her silence could be. The girl who once cried alone had now become a woman who smiled through storms. The same heart that broke in the dark was now shining like dawn. She had learned that silence doesn't mean weakness. It means wisdom, the kind that speaks only when there's something worth saying. Her silence had taught her the art of listening to her soul, to her dreams, to the gentle whisper of destiny. She had learned to live without waiting for anyone's validation. She had learned that love that leaves you also teaches you how to love yourself. And somewhere, he saw her again, not face to face, but in the stories people told. They said she had become something rare, something untouchable. He listened in silence, and that silence hurt him, because he realized that her silence had spoken everything he never stayed to hear. He remembered her last look, that quiet gaze, neither angry nor sad, just calm. It had said it all. "I loved you enough to let you go." Now, his nights were long. His laughter felt empty, because once you've known a silence that pure, that sacred, noise feels meaningless. He tried to fill the void with voices, with faces, but none of them sounded like her stillness. She had moved on, not to someone new, but to something truer. Herself. Her silence had built her, brick by brick, tear by tear, until she stood like a monument to every woman who ever loved deeply. and survived quietly. People admired her now. They called her strong, graceful, wise. But she knew it wasn't strength that made her. It was surrender. Surrender to time, to truth, to silence. One evening, she sat by the ocean, watching waves kiss the shore, and return to their endless journey. She smiled, for she saw herself in them. She too had returned, not to him, but to her peace. And as the sun sank, she whispered to the wind, "He left me once, but I found myself in the silence he left behind." The wind carried her words far across the sea, and somewhere, perhaps, he heard them, not with his ears, but with his soul. And in that moment, he finally understood. She never needed to speak, because her silence had already said everything.